Wow, things move fast in the world of finance, huh? I mean,
Yeah.
one minute everyone thinks digital assets are like a fringe thing, and then the next, bam, you've got major governments taking serious notice.
Yeah, it's crazy, right?
It really feels like we're entering a whole new chapter. So today, we're diving deep into something big, something with the potential to really shake things up. The Bitcoin Act of 2025. Here in the US, we've got a ton to unpack, from the details of the actual bill to some seriously cool projects popping up in the crypto world.
Definitely.
Our mission today is to sort through it all and bring you the most important insights, so you can grasp just how big this could all be.
Absolutely. It's way more than just watching the price charts, right?
Right.
We're talking about a potential fundamental shift, like how a major government might approach this whole decentralized finance thing, plus some super intriguing projects aimed at building real-world applications using altcoins.
Yeah.
It's a complex world out there, and we're here to make sense of it together.
Okay, so let's get right into it. The Bitcoin Act of 2025. Now, this isn't a brand new concept, is it? I feel like we've heard rumblings about similar bills before.
You're right. The info we've got suggests this is actually a reintroduction of a previous bill,
Yeah.
the one that was spearheaded by Senator Cynthia Lummis.
Uh-huh.
But the key difference this time around, and it's a big one, seems to be the amount of support it's getting in Congress.
Oh, interesting.
Like, way more cost sponsors are jumping on board this time. And what they're aiming for is pretty significant: to create a strategic Bitcoin reserve specifically for the United States.
A reserve. Wow, that's ambitious. And we're talking about 1 million Bitcoin, right?
Yeah.
That's a serious chunk of change.
It is. The proposal lays out a plan to buy 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years. And here's the kicker. There's a mandatory minimum holding period of 20 years.
20 years.
Mhm.
Wow.
To put that into perspective, that's something like 5% of Bitcoin's total supply. So if this goes through, we're talking about a huge long-term commitment.
Huge. Okay, so now the big question, the one everyone's probably thinking. How do you even pay for something that massive, especially if you're saying no taxpayer money? I mean, where does all that funding come from?
Right. Well, luckily, the source material actually goes into this.
Mm-hmm.
And the methods they're proposing are, they're pretty interesting, to say the least.
Okay, lay it on me.
So the bill clearly states that no taxpayer money will be used for this.
Okay.
Instead, they're looking at several sources, things like federal remittances.
Okay.
And remember, in 2023 alone, those totaled over $76 billion.
Oh.
Yeah. Then they're also considering potential revaluations of the U.S. gold reserves
Okay.
and tapping into the Exchange Stabilization Fund.
Wow.
And, the U.S. has a massive gold reserve, right?
Yeah.
We're talking an estimated 8,133 metric tons, worth over $750 billion.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah,
That makes those funding avenues a lot more interesting to think about.
it does, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's not like they're hitting up everyday citizens for this. They're trying to use existing resources, which kind of changes the whole conversation. But why now, What's the big push behind creating this Bitcoin reserve right now? What are the main reasons they're giving for it?
Well, what's fascinating here is that there are actually several layers to their reasoning.
Okay.
The main goal they highlight is to establish the United States as a major player in, this whole world of decentralized finance, which is moving so fast.
Yeah.
They argue that Bitcoin can act as a kind of like modern partner to our existing gold reserves, like a digital form of storing value, basically.
Huh.
But then there's also the national security angle, which is
Okay.
interesting.
Yeah.
They're saying Bitcoin is more like open and resistant to censorship, less vulnerable to those geopolitical games that countries play.
Oh, I see.
In the end, they see this as a move towards more long-term economic stability and, I guess, like a real-world example of economic freedom principles in action. I see. Those are some pretty strong arguments, especially that point about Bitcoin being harder to censor, given what's going on in the world right now.
Yeah, definitely.
And, I noticed that the bill actually includes specific stuff to protect people who already hold Bitcoin, which is a big deal for those folks.
Oh, absolutely. It's actually a crucial part of this whole thing.
Okay.
The Bitcoin Act directly aims to protect the rights of, everyday people and businesses to own, hold, and use Bitcoin freely without interference.
Good.
And it specifically recognizes self-custody as like a fundamental right when it comes to financial independence.
I like that.
That's a powerful message, It's basically saying, hey, we get it. The government's not here to mess with your personal Bitcoin.
Yeah, for sure. That focus on self-custody is a big relief, you know. A lot of people are worried about government overreach and all that. But what about this huge reserve the government's going to be holding if this goes through? Are there any, like, safety measures built in to make sure everything's on the up and up? Oh, yeah, definitely. They've thought about that.
Okay, good.
The bill says they'll implement what's called a proof of reserve system.
Okay.
Basically, this allows for public audits of the government's Bitcoin holdings, you know, total transparency.
I like it.
So it helps build trust. Plus, all those Bitcoin purchases and how they're stored, all of that would be overseen by the Controller General.
Good, good.
And remember that 20-year minimum holding period?
Yeah.
Well, that's there to stop any short-term, like politically motivated selling. It emphasizes the long-term game they're playing here.
I see. It seems like they've really tried to address all the main concerns people might have with a plan as big as this.
Yeah.
Okay, so shifting gears a bit, the source material also talks about the current state of the market, you know, hinting that now might actually be a good time to buy.
Right.
So how does that play into all these big picture strategic moves?
Well, looking at things right now, the source points out that Bitcoin has had a recent correction, about 30% down from its high, but they say this is normal, even in a market that's trending upwards over the long term.
Okay.
Things like, you know, global trade tensions and all the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that comes with it, they say those are probably playing a role in this dip, even though the fundamentals of Bitcoin are still strong.
Okay.
Basically, they're implying that this little downturn could line up perfectly with the government's plan to buy Bitcoin gradually over those 5 years, meaning they could potentially buy it up at a lower price.
Interesting. So while they're thinking long term, the market's giving them a chance to maybe get in at a discount.
Exactly.
Okay. Now let's switch lanes for a bit and talk altcoins. The source dives into this and it paints a picture of a lot of activity, maybe even some opportunities, right?
Yeah, totally. They talk about a pretty big wipeout in the altcoin market that happened since, well, you know, the Luna collapse back in May 2022. But they're saying that all this shaking up could actually be a good thing for projects that are, you know, really serious about building and offering something useful.
Oh, interesting.
Of course, the trick is figuring out which ones are going to stick around, right? It's a wild market out there.
Yeah, that's the challenge. So they mentioned one platform that might be helpful for navigating all this, BitGetSeed.
Right.
What's the deal with that? What's it all about?
Well, they describe BitGetSeed as a platform that's all about helping people find those like potentially explosive altcoins early on when they're still small. What's interesting is how they supposedly choose them.
Okay.
They use AI algorithms to analyze tons of data, both on-chain and just, you know, general big data trends.
Wow.
It's pretty high tech. The idea is that you might find these coins even before they get listed on the big exchanges, like BitGet itself. And speaking of BitGet, the source points out that they've seen some serious price jumps, like pumps, whenever they list new coins.
Oh, really?
Yeah, we're talking about gains of up to like 6,800%.
6,000. Whoa.
Yeah, pretty crazy, right?
That's wild. Okay, so BitGetSeed is all about giving people a chance to get in early on potentially successful projects before the masses.
Exactly.
Got it. Now, besides these broad discovery tools, the source also spotlights specific altcoin projects that are trying to do some interesting real-world stuff.
Right.
They start with Ando.
Right, Ando. They're focused on something called tokenization of real-world assets.
Okay.
Specifically, they're working on bringing tokenized U.S. treasuries onto the Stellar network.
U.S. Treasuries, huh? Interesting.
Yeah, and what makes Stellar interesting here is that it's all about making global payments easier.
Oh, I see.
They've actually been really successful at reaching people who don't have access to traditional banking, which is cool.
Yeah.
Like the number of stablecoin users they have and the sheer volume of payments on their network in 2024 is pretty impressive.
Wow.
Yeah. So by offering these tokenized U.S. treasuries on Stellar, Ando wants to give people and institutions a way to like get more value out of their assets, you know, hedge against inflation,
Yeah.
and get into on-chain savings.
So you could have people all over the world, maybe in places without easy access to financial stuff, being able to get involved with U.S. treasuries, all thanks to Stellar and Ando's tokenization work.
Exactly.
That's a pretty powerful example of how blockchain can make finance more inclusive.
It is.
Now, another project that caught my eye was World Mobile Chain. It sounds like they're going through some big changes.
Definitely. Big changes. They're moving from what was World Mobile Token X, or WMTX, to a whole new thing, World Mobile Chain. They're saying it's the first dedicated Layer 3 blockchain specifically for telecom, aimed at, you know, those decentralized physical infrastructure networks, or DPIN, and people building in that space.
Okay.
They've already gotten a lot of users in emerging markets, especially in Asia and in Africa. And guess what? They're setting their sights on the US in 2025. Big move.
Wow, that's ambitious.
Yeah. Their big idea is to create decentralized wireless networks.
Yeah.
No more contracts, hidden fees, or those middlemen that always take a cut. And just to be clear, WMTX is still going to be the fuel for this new chain.
Okay.
And those Earth node operators are still essential to how the whole network works.
So decentralized wireless, that could be a game changer, especially in places where the traditional infrastructure is either limited or just way too expensive.
Absolutely.
It's about making connectivity more accessible and giving people more control. Okay, last but not least in the altcoin world, they mentioned a partnership happening in the crypto gaming space, right?
Yeah. Superverse, the folks behind the Super token, they've teamed up with Medieval Empires, which uses the ME token.
Okay.
What they're doing is integrating Super into the Medieval Empires marketplace. They're using Portal Coin to make it happen, and it'll let people buy stuff in-game using Super.
Interesting.
Plus, they've launched a loyalty program where if you hold Super, you get rewarded with ME tokens and NFTs. It's another example of how these crypto projects are working together,
Yeah.
trying to